to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video, and this will be my fifth and final upload of the day, but unfortunately fortunately, I love doing it, but a lot of New York Giants news came out today with the NFL Combine now here. There were interviews, and obviously a lot of things were said, but one thing that was not said by Joe Judge or Dave Gettleman were some of the players that the New York Giants are projected to interview and some of the players that they've already talked to, and we'll get into all those players. One was a center, and there were two wide receivers. I'm going to talk more about the wide receivers in this video. Now, of course, going into the offseason, the New York Giants' biggest needs, I think most would agree, are offensive tackle, center, edge rusher, maybe some help in the secondary, and they could use a tall threat at the wide receiver position. When you take a look at the wide receivers on the New York Giants' current roster, you got two wide receivers who are very similar in the fact that they're both similar in size and in their role with Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate. You have Darius Slayton, who's a vertical threat, but he's 6'1". They could really use a really tall threat, similar to what Plaxico Burress was for Eli Manning in his second year, especially with Jason Garrett being the offensive coordinator. Because Garrett, of course, you go back and look at the course of history, he likes tall wide receivers. You look at Miles Austin, you look at Des Bryant, you look at guys that were successful for the Dallas Cowboys. I think the New York Giants, if they take a wide receiver in this year's draft, which I expect them to do at some point, they will target a tall wide receiver. You go back and look at the Senior Bowl. I think they interviewed 5 wide receivers from that game. All 5 of them were, I think, over 6'3". The Giants are clearly looking at tall wide receivers. And Chase Claypool and Tee Higgins, two guys that the New York Giants have reportedly talked to, are no different. And I think they're two guys that could certainly be New York Giants on draft night. Now, one would go much earlier than the other. Tee Higgins, by a lot of people's standards, is going mocked in the back end of the first to the early second round. So if the Giants were to get him, they'd either A, have to trade back up into the back end, or he'd have to fall to them. I would not trade back up for him. This is a very deep wide receivers class, but if he's there at number 36 and the Giants have addressed some other needs in free agency and in the first round, Tee Higgins could certainly be on their radar. He's a very strong wide receiver out of Clemson. The book on him is very similar to Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool is not quite as polished. He's not quite as good of a route runner and maybe not quite as athletic, even though he's projected to have a better 40 time. A lot of people think Tee Higgins is a much more polished wide receiver and a much more pro-ready receiver with a much higher upside at the pro level. But I wouldn't mind either one of them. Higgins, of course, you're going to have to invest a much earlier pick. If they're going to take Higgins, it would be at number 36 overall if he fell there. Claypool's another story, but Claypool, much like Higgins, is another tall threat. So if nothing else, even if they don't take these two wide receivers, it clearly shows you the type of wide receiver the New York Giants are looking to acquire. They're looking to acquire a 50-50 receiver, a guy with good body control that could go up and catch the jump ball. And that is something that would certainly help Daniel Jones, not just in the red zone, but at the 50-yard line. Have the ability, when he's under pressure, to be able to rely on a guy that has the 3 or 4 inch advantage on the cornerback that's guarding him. And there's very few cornerbacks that are over 6 feet, 6 foot 1 inches tall. So you're always going to have that advantage on a jump ball with one-on-one coverage. So they definitely could use a wide receiver like that on this football team. And both of these guys would accomplish that. Claypool, not quite the route runner of Higgins, which is why I think he's going to go in the 4th or even possibly 5th round from some mocks I've seen. Could go as early as the mid-3rd. We'll have to wait and see. The Combine will have a lot to do with the stock of both of these players, but we'll get into some of the stats. We'll get into what was said about in terms of interviewing all 3 of these prospects right now. We're going to start with the center out of San Diego, and that, of course, is Keith Ishmael. He's being mocked in the 3rd to 4th round area, and I'll speak as to why I think the New York Giants may have interviewed him today. The Giants are scheduled to conduct a formal interview with San Diego State center Keith Ishmael in Indianapolis this week. Ishmael started 38 games in 3 years for the Aztecs, 27 at center, 10 at right guard, and 1 at left guard. The 6'3", 310-pound redshirt junior was first-team All-Mountain West in both of his final 2 years of college ball. He has been projected as high as a 3rd-round pick. Wisconsin's Tyler Biadasz, Washington's Nick Harris, LSU's Lloyd Cushenberry III, and Michigan's Cesar Ruiz are the other centers to watch. And all those guys, from what I've seen, are projected to go very back end of the first, between the back end of the first to the back end of the second for the most part. So for the Giants to get any one of those guys, they're probably going to have to take him in the 2nd round. This is a guy they'd be looking if they decide to address other areas in the 1st and 2nd round. They could look to take Keith Ishmael either with that comp pick in the 3rd or with the early 4th round pick. But I think it's clearly showing you what the New York Giants are looking to address in the draft, and it may show you what they're not looking to address in free agency. You're not going to draft a center and sign a center in free agency. So if they're considering taking Ishmael, and who knows, they may still be in on Connor McGovern, who's the number one center prospect this year in free agency, or maybe somebody else to sign. Obviously, I think they need to address that. I don't see them bringing back John Halapio. He was that bad, but maybe they look to address that need in free agency. It is certainly possible. We're going to have to wait and see, but if they're looking at a guy like this, or they're looking at any of those centers highlighted below, I very much doubt they would address center in free agency. We're going to have to wait and see, but I do think it will be addressed either in free agency or in the draft, and we'll see. They definitely need to get younger on that offensive line. The next thing we're going to pull up is the tweet from Patricia Triana talking about the two wide receivers. Wide receivers Chase Claypool and Tee Higgins, they said today that they have met with the Giants. Not sure if it was an informal or at the Senior Bowl. Formal interviews have not started yet. So they've talked to the Giants. They didn't specify if it was at the Senior Bowl or if it was an informal interview. I do think I read from other sources that it may have been an informal interview today. But regardless, both of them confirmed that the New York Giants have shown interest, as they should. I think both these guys would fit what the New York Giants are looking for at that position. I think they're both very good players. It's just a matter of, where you value taking the wide receiver position. Me personally, I think we have bigger needs to address both in free agency and early on in the draft before I want to spend it on a wide receiver. I still think our wide receiver core is strong enough where I don't need to invest an early round pick in this year's draft. That's just my personal opinion. I think Claypool would be a fine pick. There's a bunch of other guys there that will be available as well. Gandy Golden's another one that could go in the back end of the third, early fourth, along with a bunch of others. But I think Claypool's the more attractive option for me, just for the simple reason that I think I could get more value at the position. But Higgins very well may not even be there when the Giants pick in the second round. He's a guy that could easily go to the Eagles or someone else in the back end of the first round. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. And then I just want to pull up their stats for you guys. We'll start with Claypool. Claypool played at Notre Dame for 4 years. This year, obviously, was his best year. He caught 13 touchdowns, had over 1,000 yards, and 66 receptions for the Fighting Irish. I got a chance to see some of his games. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I normally work on Saturdays. I don't get to see all the games. But he's a good guy in the red zone, and he displayed that in the Senior Bowl. I think he caught a touchdown in the Senior Bowl. And would certainly be a solid red zone target in the NFL and has some high upside and is definitely worth a stab in the fourth or fifth round, which is where I think the New York Giants would be looking to acquire Claypool if they were to bring him in, if he was available then. And like I said, his stock could go up or down based on this combine. A lot of these guys. I was surprised when I saw his projected 40 speed was in the 4.4s. So that could certainly help him if he runs a good 40 time and people like his route running ability better than projected. That seems to be his weakness. And some people, his blocking as well is a strength from what I read, which makes sense. Both these guys are pretty good blockers for tall wide receivers, being that they're tall and they have long arms. And then finally, I wanted to go over Tee Higgins' stats. Tee Higgins was a 3-year player with Clemson, and he's been great the last 2 years. He's got 25 combined touchdowns over his last 2 years. He had 59 catches, but he averaged almost 20 yards a reception with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback for the Clemson Tigers this year. He had 13 touchdowns on just 59 catches for just under 1,200 yards. So he had a great year this year for Clemson, and it's why he's being projected as highly as he is. But, we'll have to wait and see if the New York Giants have significant interest in either one of these prospects. I personally think they should. If the price is right. Higgins, for me, I don't want to take a wide receiver that early. The only way I would entertain taking a wide receiver that early is if I addressed everything else in free agency and the first round of the draft. I already have my tackle in place. I already have my edge rusher, whether it was free agency or the draft. I just think there's way too many other bigger needs, whether it's linebacker, cornerback, safety. Wide receiver is definitely necessary. We're going to need it sooner than later. I don't trust Golden Tate to be very good after probably this year. Sterling Shepard's an injury concern. And regardless, we definitely need another vertical threat on the outside, specifically in this offense. I just think you could look for guys like Claypool or Gandy Golden or players like that later in the draft, guys that are more of a project but still have upside. You're not going to get a Tee Higgins that late, but you could still get a pretty good prospect there late in the draft. And if I was the general manager, that's what I would do. I know a lot of Giants fans may want to take a guy like Higgins or a wide receiver with that second-round pick or even a first-round pick. I've heard some Giants fans say that they'd want to take Jerry Jeudy in the first. That's just not me. I think the Giants have much bigger needs at the offensive line and the pass rusher position. I would look to address the wide receiver later in the draft, whether it be the fourth, the fifth round. Same thing could be said for the running back position. But Higgins is a great talent. And the Giants are doing their due diligence. And if nothing else, like I said earlier in the video, I think them looking at these receivers, just like they did with other receivers at the Senior Bowl game, everybody that they've been interested in at that position supposedly has been a tall threat, which only makes sense for the type of offense that Jason Garrett is looking to run for the New York Giants. And it was their need to begin with. They've needed a tall threat, and that will help Daniel Jones out tremendously. Having Slayton on the other side, you will have two vertical threats, and then you'll have the tight end Evan Ingram to serve over the middle along with Saquon Barkley. So we'll see if these guys are on the Giants draft board come draft night, but they're at least interviewing them, and they're showing interest. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.